A new impetus for peace in the Middle East. Israel's Prime Minister says he'll talk to anyone, anywhere. Hello and welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to the United Kingdom and around the world. The headlines: Benjamin Netanyahu says he's prepared to attend a summit meeting in London next month to restart the peace process. After meeting Britain's Prime Minister, he agrees to American proposals as the basis for new peace talks. The Summit of the Americas ends in Chile with the signing of a new cooperation agreement. And Linda McCartney, the wife of the former Beatle Sir Paul McCartney, has died after losing her fight against cancer. Hello, I'm Maxine Mawhinney. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he wants a Middle East peace conference to be held, possibly as early as May the 4th in London. He says he's ready to go anywhere to discuss American proposals for advancing the stalled peace process. Mr. Netanyahu was speaking after talks in Jerusalem with his British counterpart Tony Blair, who's the current president of the European Union. Mr. Blair is due in Gaza later today to discuss the peace process with the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat.
Mr. Blair's welcome in the Middle East has had a special flavour because his settlement in Northern Ireland has been a reminder that historic enemies can reach an accommodation, that seemingly intractable problems sometimes are solved. Israel's Prime Minister seemed to have caught a touch of the mood, signalling his willingness to travel to London within a month for tripartite talks with Palestinians and American peacemakers.
If there's a desire to achieve the peace, that peace will be achieved. I can categorically tell you we have that desire. We discussed today the meeting that we would have next month in London with a variety of efforts to move the process forward.
Though plenty of Arab leaders doubt it, Mr. Blair believes that Mr. Netanyahu is serious about engaging in peace talks, and he called for compromise.
It does require a degree of trust in circumstances where people don't trust each other. It is in the nature of disputes such as the Middle East peace process or indeed Northern Ireland that there's a legacy of distrust, and somehow we have to build the confidence to get over that.
Mr. Blair began, as his Foreign Secretary didn't on his controversial visit, by going to the Holocaust Museum, commemorating the murder of 6 million Jews. It was careful diplomacy, but he was clearly moved.
Having realized the depths of evil to which humanity can sink, now let us hope in the future we can show the heights to which humanity can rise.
The Prime Minister, who's anxious to win a role for the European Union in the peace process, argues that the best security for Israel is peace, and tomorrow he'll sign a European agreement with the Palestinians to improve their anti-terrorist efforts. After his achievement of a settlement in Northern Ireland, the British Prime Minister has come to Israel, keen to do anything he and the European Union can to help breathe new life into the peace process. But with Mr. Netanyahu clearly sceptical both about Europe's knowledge of the Middle East and its right to get involved, he's treading carefully. Mr. Blair's receiving a much warmer welcome, though, than his Foreign Secretary did before him. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The leaders of 34 nations spanning North and South America have ended their weekend summit in the Chilean capital, Santiago. The summit originally planned to focus on the creation of a pan-American free trade area, but it was overshadowed by more pressing regional issues. The fight against drugs, arms smuggling and poverty were topics that dominated 2 days of discussions, and Cuba's exclusion from the summit was also the center of debate.
The Santiago Declaration made no mention of how Cuba would be brought into discussions over regional integration. That's despite pressure from Canada and several Caribbean nations to force a common stance on how to deal with Fidel Castro's regime. But the steady debate over the Cuba issue did bring reaction from the United States.
I think there is agreement and hope, particularly with the historic visit of the Pope and the space provided with that visit, that we can see some movement toward a more democratic governance, a respect for human rights, certainly some building of a civil society in Cuba.
There's also been concern about the extremes of rich and poor. Half the region's population still leave school before they're 12 years old.
We are morally obliged to do something about poverty. We've had enough talk. History will never forgive us unless we act.
For all the serious talk, there have been lighter moments. On a walkabout, President Clinton was offered presents, including saxophones and well-known books on sexual techniques.
The summit closed with little progress on trade issues, but what has been agreed is a new initiative to fight the war against drug trafficking. That will please the United States, which has argued that drugs are more readily available and cheaper to buy than ever before. Richard Collings, BBC News, Santiago.
Linda McCartney, the wife of the former Beatle Sir Paul McCartney, has died at the age of 56. A statement from her family said she died peacefully at Santa Barbara in California on Friday. This picture of Linda was taken last week and released by her family. She had been treated for breast cancer since 1995. David Sillito has been looking back at her life.
Everything is fine. My heart is shaking.
In March, Linda McCartney's final public appearance at her daughter Stella's first Paris fashion show. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer in 1995. It was thought she had beaten the disease, but the cancer had spread to her liver. She died on Friday with her husband Paul at her bedside. The news of that marriage nearly 30 years ago was for many a day of national mourning. The last bachelor Beatle had been lost. His new wife was Linda Reisman. She was an American photographer. Born in 1941 in Scarsdale near New York, she was the daughter of a successful lawyer. She studied in Vermont and Arizona before a chance invitation while working as a receptionist gave her exclusive access to the Rolling Stones backstage. Other assignments soon followed: Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and of course the biggest band of the 60s, the Beatles. And from that, the relationship that broke the hearts of Beatle fans. It was one of pop's most stable relationships. They forswore the showbiz lifestyle. They hardly spent a night apart. She sang and played in Paul's new band, Wings, and continued her interest in photography. Contented to live in the country with her family and horses, she was also a passionate vegetarian. Her range of meat-free meals made her a millionaire in her own right in the 1990s. She was far more than just the wife of Paul McCartney. Tonight, at the British Academy of Film and Television Awards, Lord David Putnam gave this tribute.
He was a remarkable woman, who was half of a remarkable marriage, who brought up some remarkable children, who lived long enough to see at least one of those children become a phenomenal success. Everything she did with her life was positive. Her fight for vegetarianism, her fight for the environment. He was a totally positive woman. Her last and most courageous fight against cancer she lost. So I think what BAFTA would like to say is, thanks a lot, Linda. Thanks for everything you helped to do for all of us. I think you'd probably all like to send your love, affection to Paul and the kids. And we're an industry that hates silence, as you just heard just now with Jimmy Stewart. Maybe a short but warm standing ovation.
The Sinn Féin president, Gerry Adams, has ended his party's annual conference by telling delegates, quote, "We have changed the landscape of Irish politics and we've not finished yet," unquote. The conference ended without a vote on the Northern Ireland peace agreement, but it's thought the deal will be endorsed at a special conference within the next month.
For Irish Republicans, the agreement reached on Good Friday at Stormont presents dilemmas as well as opportunities, and biting the bullet, as one delegate put it during today's debate, is no easy task. The mixed feelings about the deal amongst Sinn Féin's grassroots were clearly on display.
My view is that we should give the document a qualified welcome. I also hold a personal view that we should change our constitution and enter a new assembly.
I cannot advocate a yes vote for an agreement that legitimises a six-county statelet and enforces unionist veto over our people. I believe for Irish Republicans to enter such a body could become political suicide.
With those divergent views in mind, it's thought Sinn Féin might eventually advocate a mixed response to the deal, urging its supporters in Northern Ireland to vote yes, but telling Republicans south of the Irish border that it's OK to vote no.
People are naturally very worried at the proposed changes in the Irish Constitution. Obviously, in the context, as Pat Doherty has said, of a partition country, there are two political realities, North and South.
The Ulster Unionist leader David Trimble today expressed his concern about Sinn Féin's likely response to the deal, which he fears won't amount to a clear acceptance of democratic politics.
Sinn Féin needn't think that they can take advantage of the benefit of this without accepting the burden. And the burden is showing that they have now finally turned their back on violence and are committed solely to democratic means. Otherwise, they won't have the advantage of the agreement.
Despite David Trimble's reservations, there's no disguising the scale of the debate now underway within Sinn Féin. In several speeches today, senior Republicans advocated participation in a future Northern Ireland Assembly, something which would have been quite unthinkable just a few months ago in a movement that has always rejected Northern Ireland's very right to exist. It seems that with some reservations, the Sinn Féin leadership is preparing its supporters to go with the grain of the Good Friday Agreement. Mark Devonport, BBC News, Dublin.
Diplomats are trying to secure the safe release of a British family who have been kidnapped in Yemen. David Mitchell, the director of the British Council, his wife Carolyn and their son Ben were driving from the port of Aden to the capital Sana'a on Friday when their car was stopped by tribesmen. It's the 6th kidnapping incident to involve foreigners this year. All those previously held have been released unharmed. Bill Hayton, who's recently returned from Yemen, looks at the background to this latest kidnapping.
The road which the Mitchell family were travelling along is the main route south of the capital. It's usually busy with traffic and there are police checkpoints outside the major towns. But despite the precautions, kidnapping is a frequent occurrence in Yemen, though the number of incidents has been falling since the government stepped up security for tour groups last year. The Mitchells, however, were travelling in their own car when they were stopped. Government representatives are now negotiating with the tribe who are believed to have taken them hostage. Demands have apparently been issued for their release, though they haven't been made public.
Well, this particular tribe seemed to make rather a habit of this sort of thing. October last year, they took a British aid worker hostage and held him for 2 weeks. On that occasion, they were looking for some water projects for their area, and I think some electricity projects as well. In January this year, they took a German engineer hostage, and again, the demands were rather similar. They were also, I think, looking for higher wages for some of their tribal members who are employed by the government.
In the capital Sana'a, the British Council says it's concerned about the family, but they say they're calm people and strong Christians who'll cope well with their ordeal. And though it may take several days, they're optimistic that they'll be released unharmed. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
An international conference to discuss ways of speeding up the provision of food and medicine to the people of Iraq opens in London today, but Iraqi officials are staying away. Iraq says its boycott is a protest at continuing delays in the delivery of basic goods, following United Nations sanctions imposed after the Gulf War. We have this special report from our correspondent in Baghdad, Jim Fish, on the way sanctions are affecting Iraq.
On the face of it, hunger does not yet walk the streets of Baghdad. Under the United Nations Oil for Food program, Iraq can import $2 billion worth of food every 6 months with the proceeds of its oil exports, and this is to be increased to more than $5 billion. Iraq says its rationing system is efficient, although prices of basic food in the open market are beyond the means of Iraq's poorest. The London conference aims to boost the supply of food and medicines Iraq can buy, but Iraqis say without sanctions there'll be no need for this help.
Let them stop this conference. It has nothing to do with us. If they want to help us, they can do it by lifting sanctions.
Life on the streets of Baghdad goes on much as usual. But politically, there's been a new hard edge to official statements as the authorities show increasing impatience with sanctions. Iraq's volunteer army has been on parade in Baghdad. Up to 1 million, mainly civilian recruits, hurriedly trained up during the recent crisis over weapons inspections. Saddam Hussein, in civilian clothes, took the salute. It's rare that he appears in public at such events, a display of Iraq's defiance and anger over sanctions. In protest, Iraq is boycotting the conference, but wants Britain at least to unfreeze $800 million worth of Iraqi assets.
We ask the British administration to lift sanctions on our frozen assets and to allow us, we are ready to buy medicine, food, and other civilian requirements for Iraqi people from only British market.
One basic problem which the conference can't solve is the rundown state of Iraq's oil industry. Experts say even if Iraq wanted to, it physically can't export the oil it's allowed to. Sanctions ban the import of any machinery which could have a military use. Electricity and clean water supplies are similarly affected, causing an alarming increase in childhood diseases and deaths. Iraq's critics, including Britain, say the suffering is due more to neglect than sanctions. That's a deep divide which will take more than one conference to heal. Jim Fish, BBC News, Baghdad.
And you're watching BBC News. A reminder of the headlines. Israel's Prime Minister has agreed to new Middle East peace talks on the basis of US proposals. American leaders have ended their summit in Chile with a commitment to create the world's largest trade bloc. And coming up later in this program, disaster in the sky. An aerobatics display in Florida goes tragically wrong. US unions have pledged to boycott Australian products in support of sacked Australian dock workers. The dockers were fired en masse by the Australian port operator Patrick Stevedores and replaced by non-union workers. The resulting dispute has brought thousands onto the streets of Australia in protest.
Nearly 2 weeks on, Australia's dock dispute is still going strong and in danger of spinning out of control. Demonstrating has been marred by tough police tactics and picket violence, culminating in a police crackdown in Melbourne on Saturday. But every endeavour to drag away the picketers has failed to break the blockade, forcing freight vehicles to leave empty-handed, while more than $200 million worth of cargo sits at the docks. Companies hit by the blockade are warning they may be forced to lay off staff, but there is no end in sight. Both sides are getting ready for the long haul as the dispute threatens to become a global issue.
History's going to record tonight, and the next night, and the next days, and the next weeks as one of the most important in the history of industrial relations.
The union claims that by sacking 1,400 union staff, the port operator Patrick Stevedores is trying to break the maritime union and bust dock workers' unions globally. And their claims have stirred a chord with their international colleagues. A major waterfront union in America has said it'll be boycotting Australian products, whilst a New Zealand union says it's considering what action to take. The dispute has also galvanised the public. Across the country, Australians have been demonstrating in support of the dockers. And as the lines are drawn, it appears there is no room for compromise. Demetha Luthra, BBC News.
The Chinese dissident leader Wang Dan has thanked the United States for its efforts in securing his release from prison. Wang was being punished for his part in the 1989 Tiananmen Square democracy movement, but was released at the weekend by the Chinese authorities and sent into exile. Shortly after his arrival in the United States on Sunday, he was given a preliminary medical examination.
Mr. Wang is in stable and good condition in our institution. Our intent is to finish his workup tomorrow morning. We have all the appropriate areas scheduled already.
He does complain of a chronic cough. He's had this actually for several years, a little worse more recently. We believe he most likely has an allergic cough or perhaps chronic bronchitis.
2 pilots have been killed in an accident at an air show in the United States. The men were part of an aerobatic display team flying at the show in Florida when their planes collided 1,500 feet above the ground. I'm sorry, we're having a few problems with that report. The British film The Full Monty has swept the board, while the US blockbuster Titanic sank without a trace at the BAFTA Awards in London. The Full Monty was named Best Film, and its star, Robert Carlyle, won the award for Best Leading Actor. In contrast to the recent Oscar ceremony in Hollywood, Titanic failed to win any prizes.
The weather may have been utterly British, but many of the stars attending the BAFTAs were international, a reflection perhaps of the new importance Hollywood attaches to our homegrown film industry and talent. For the cast of The Full Monty, it was their night. The Full Monty took 4 awards overall, more than any of the other films nominated this year. Its star, Robert Carlyle, fought off the LA Confidential contender, Kevin Spacey, to take Best Actor.
And I'd like to dedicate this award to my father, who's the greatest man I've ever known. Thank you very much.
Titanic, after sweeping the board at the Oscars, ended up with not a single BAFTA.
Iceberg, right ahead!
In another change of fortune, Dame Judi Dench made up for losing out in LA, winning a BAFTA for Best Actress for her portrayal of Queen Victoria in Mrs. Brown.
My thanks go not least to Billy Connolly, who, thank goodness, originally he wanted Bob Hoskins to play Queen Victoria. I'm just delighted to be Bob Hoskins' understudy.
Her co-star Billy Connolly was putting a brave face on failing to win Best Actor. But his fellow Scot, Sean Connery, was given an Academy Fellowship Award for his service to the industry.
In the past, the BAFTA Awards have covered both film and television. This ceremony, for the first time, has concentrated just on movies. The Academy says it wants to recognise the importance of the British film industry alone. Stars of the small screen will be honoured in their own event in a month's time. Madeleine Holt, BBC News at the BAFTAs.
And we can return to that earlier story. 2 pilots have been killed in an accident at an air show in the United States. The men were part of an aerobatic display team flying at the show in Florida when their planes collided 1,500 feet above the ground.
The 4 antique biplanes of the Red Baron flying group were nearing the end of their performance at the Kissimmee Air Show of the Stars, south of Orlando in Florida, just before midday on Sunday. Weather conditions were described as far from ideal, with low cloud and winds gusting up to 30 miles an hour. The 2 single-engine Stearman aircraft collided as they were flying 1,500 feet above the ground. Burning debris showered a field close to one of the runways. The 2 pilots, who've been named as James Edward Lovelace and Randall L. Drake, were killed instantly. Between them, they had 18 years of experience flying formation aerobatics with the Red Baron group, who are based in Minnesota. The aircraft came down around 1,000 yards from the crowds who'd gathered for the air show, but none of the estimated 5,000 spectators was hurt. An investigation will now attempt to determine the exact cause of the accident. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News.
Some sport now, and Barcelona have been celebrating clinching the Spanish Football League title for the 15th time in their history. They went into the game against Real Zaragoza only needing a point to take the title, but they celebrated in style with a 1-0 victory.
Only needing a draw going into the match, Barcelona had to wait until late in the game for the goal that gave them all 3 points. A corner from the right was poorly cleared, and the cross back into the area was met by the head of Giovanni. This with just 13 minutes left in the game. The fans in the Nou Camp were already celebrating the title, but Brazilian international Rivaldo had ideas of increasing the scoreline. Late into the game, he saw his thunderous free kick from just outside the area crash against the Zaragoza crossbar. Barcelona did not have long to wait until the celebrations were official. The final whistle was greeted with great jubilation by the players on the pitch, with coach Louis van Gaal delighted to have silenced his critics with the league title. The players went to share their success with the capacity crowd, and the party atmosphere inside the ground was then transferred to the streets of Barcelona. Sleep was impossible in the city centre as car and bike horns sounded well into the night. Firecrackers were lit and fans danced in the street. People gathered in the Plaza de Catalunya to celebrate what could be the first part of a double. Barcelona are also through to face Mallorca in the Spanish Cup final. Mark Eames, BBC News.
And in the English Premiership, Liverpool have failed to close the gap on the main title contenders Arsenal and Manchester United. They could only manage a 1-1 draw with Coventry. Liverpool opened the scoring with Michael Owen, but Dion Dublin equalised from the penalty spot after the break. In other Premiership matches, Chelsea beat Sheffield Wednesday 1-0 to move to 4th in the table. In Scotland, Rangers' chances of a record 10th title in a row have been reduced after a 1-0 defeat at Aberdeen. Celtic are now 3 points clear at the top of the Premier Division with just 3 games to go. Now that's the sport. Let's have a look at what the international papers are saying around the world, starting with the International Herald Tribune this morning. There we go. Talking the Chinese dissidents, Wang Dan, who's now in exile in the United States, is spurring headlines of liberal thoughts bloom in a new Beijing spring. Intellectual seeds of liberal political reform are sprouting, it says. Moving along to the South China Morning Post, there we go. Wang Dan reaches the United States, a picture of him there. And apparently the democracy movement leaders are now planning a reunion. Moving on to the Asian Age. And in fact, we'll come to look at some of the British papers instead this morning back here in London. As talks of Middle East peace are on the front pages. The British Financial Times, which does other matters other than financial. EU, Arafat move to end Mid-East deadlock. Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, to announce the setting up of a joint committee on security. Mr. Blair there moving from peace in Northern Ireland to peace in the Middle East. And it's the same in the front pages of the Times this morning as well. There we go. London may host the Mid-East peace talks, it says. Talks that may take place early in May with, of course, Washington's approval, but apparently Washington had been advised in advance and has agreed to that. The Daily Telegraph is got a big picture there of Paul McCartney and his wife Linda, who has died of breast cancer in California. Linda McCartney dies of cancer. And also on the left-hand part here, the British government is planning a reform of their child support agency, where absent fathers are forced to pay a fixed proportion of their income towards their children's upkeep. They're going to make it simpler, easier, and hopefully help single mothers get money from the absent fathers. And just a quick look at the tabloids now. There we go. Linda loses the fight to live. Linda McCartney again. And in the front of the Daily Mirror, if I can get it up here for you, Linda is dead. Paul at the bedside as she dies of cancer. Those are the papers. You're watching BBC News Now. The weather.
Hello. Well, during tonight we've seen a weather front work its way across Britain, but this is the last one that's going to get right the way across to the eastern side, because for the rest of this week the weather fronts are going to remain well and truly out towards the west. The other thing I can tell you is that it's going to get warmer at long last. We're going to see temperatures up around where they should be for the time of year, with these southerly winds coming in. But there is a little sting in the tail, because the winds are going to swing easterly as we head through to the end of the week, and that means the east coast will be feeling quite chilly, and eventually those easterly winds will push right the way across into central Britain too. So it will cool down a little bit. Let me show you on here. You can see the yellow colours come back during Tuesday and Wednesday. That means it's going to be pretty warm, but then we lose those as we go through to Thursday and Friday. Well, starting on Tuesday, you can see that the winds are coming up from a southerly direction. This little weather front will bring some rain in during Tuesday, but then another one works its way across towards Ireland during Wednesday. It stays put there during Thursday practically, and even on Friday I think it's going to struggle to get too much further towards the east. Now that's good news for gardeners. We've seen some very wet weather recently, some cold weather as well, but this week certainly won't be cold, and there's a good chance that you'll be able to get out and about to do all these jobs that are around for the spring season, certainly the busiest of the seasons in the garden. Well, let's take a look at this morning then. You can see where the misty, murky weather is going to start off. Fairly dry in many parts. The wet weather will be up here across central and southern Scotland. Even here, though, that weather front will be getting weaker, so there won't be as much rain as we saw further south. As we go through the day, we will see showers moving their way eastwards. Some of those could be heavy and thundery, particularly across southern Britain. Out towards the west of Scotland, it will stay dry, and northern Scotland will never get that weather front moving up there, so it should stay on the whole fairly dry, albeit fairly cloudy. As we head into the evening, the showers will die away from inland areas, and then we're going to see the first signs of the next weather front coming in to the very far west of Ireland. As far as temperatures are concerned for today, not too bad at all, around 11 to 13, so at last back up up into double figures well and truly. Into Tuesday morning, it'll start misty and murky across many central and eastern areas. Once that goes, it will be dry and bright. The wet weather will be down across western Scotland, western parts of northern England, into Wales and the West Country, and across Northern Ireland. As we go into the afternoon, though, it's not going to make too much progress further eastwards, so it should stay dry and bright for many of us during Tuesday, with temperatures around 12 to 14. As we go through to Wednesday, well, we could see temperatures getting up as high as 16. That's 60 Fahrenheit. Bye for now.
You're watching BBC News 24. The latest news just coming up to 3:30. Linda McCartney, the wife of the musician Paul McCartney, has died at the age of 56 in Santa Barbara on the west coast of America. Her husband was at her bedside when she died on Friday. Linda McCartney had been suffering from breast cancer, but recently appeared with her husband at their daughter Stella's first fashion show as a designer. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has offered to reopen the Middle East peace negotiations. His announcement follows a meeting with Tony Blair, who's visiting Israel, in an attempt to restart the stalled Arab-Israeli talks. Mr. Netanyahu said he was willing to use American proposals as a framework for the future negotiations. Sinn Féin has taken a wait-and-see stance on the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement. Its annual conference in Dublin has agreed to hold a special decision-making meeting within the next few weeks. A British family has been kidnapped by tribesmen in Yemen. David Mitchell, who's an official with the British Council in Aden, was taken along with his wife and son while en route to the capital Sana'a from Aden. More than 100 foreigners have been kidnapped since 1992, but most of them have been freed unharmed. Downing Street says the Saudi government will seriously consider whether to order the early release of 2 British nurses imprisoned in Saudi Arabia after Mr. Blair raised their cases during his visit there. Deborah Parry and Lucille McLaughlin were imprisoned in December 1996 following the murder of an Australian colleague. Tributes are being paid to Lord Howell, the former Labour minister who's died. He collapsed during a charity event in the West Midlands last night. Dennis Howell, who was 74, had represented his Birmingham constituency for more than 30 years. Now, the film Monty has swept the board at the British Academy Film Awards. It won Best Film, Best Actor for Robert Carlyle and Best Supporting Actor for Tom Wilkinson. And it got the stamp of approval from the public as well as the British Academy. It was given the Most Popular in the Audience Award too. Dame Judi Dench won Best Actress for her role as Queen Victoria in Mrs. Brown.
I feel terrific, absolutely terrific. I'm sorry that Billy hasn't got an award, but I feel terrific, and it is one that we all share. It was very much a team effort, and it's no secret that it was for television, and this is beyond our wildest dreams, really.
Well, that's all the main news stories for the moment. I'll be back with a full bulletin at the top of the hour, but now on BBC News 24, it's Chronicles.
In this week's Chronicles, a bomb blast in the US Embassy in Beirut kills 40 people. The Khmer Rouge Revolution sweeps across Cambodia, and John Demjanjuk is found guilty of Nazi war crimes.
In the panic and confusion that followed the explosion, the only fact beyond doubt was that it had been a very big blast indeed. Many vehicles were on fire, masonry, twisted metal and broken glass were scattered everywhere. Rescue workers in Lebanon have become experienced in dealing with emergencies of this kind, and as they began bringing out the bodies, it was clear that the casualty toll of both dead and wounded was going to be high. One theory about the cause is that a car packed with explosives was driven up to the front door of the embassy. In any event, the resulting blast was powerful enough to blow out completely one section of the building, and the rest of the embassy was wrecked. Rescue workers face a difficult and dangerous job trying to get to those people known to be trapped in the debris and to search for others. The American ambassador, Robert Dillon, was in the building at the time.
We speculate a car bomb, but we don't know. Will require further investigation before we know what happened. There have been casualties, American casualties. I cannot go any farther. I can't discuss them because we are still accounting for people.
It will be many hours before the full extent of both the casualties and the damage are known. But already the Lebanese people are wondering how what must have been one of the best guarded buildings in the capital could have been bombed in this way.
No matter who was behind the attack, no matter what their motives, this was a foul and ugly reminder of Lebanon's continuing capacity for violence, at a time when the Lebanese people themselves were hoping it was all in the past. Certainly it represents the most serious setback so far to the Lebanese efforts, with American support, to get their country back to normal.
The president learned of the bombing first from sketchy news reports, then from the State Department and his national security advisor. At mid-morning, Mr. Reagan came out into the White House Rose Garden to attend a Peace Corps ceremony. He used the occasion to give his reaction to events in Beirut.
As you know, our embassy in Beirut was the target this morning of a vicious terrorist bombing. This cowardly act has claimed a number of killed and wounded. It appears that there are some American casualties, but we don't know yet the exact number or the extent of injury. This criminal attack on a diplomatic establishment will not deter us from our goals of peace in the region. We will do what we know to be right. The people of Lebanon must be given the chance to resume their efforts to lead a normal life, free from violence, without the presence of unauthorized foreign forces on their soil. And to this noble end, I rededicate the efforts of the United States.
The president continued with his regular program, giving awards to Peace Corps volunteers. But back in the Oval Office, he's having to deal with a new emergency, yet another serious setback to his hopes to bring peace to Lebanon. Though the attack was not on the peacekeeping force, but on a target that's been there for years, one effect of it, politically, must be to increase the pressure for a reduced American commitment in Beirut, a commitment that is open-ended and costing American lives.
These were the last sights and sounds recorded by Western cameramen the day last April when power passed to Cambodia's communists, the Khmer Rouge.
This soldier pulled his pistol and went around ordering people to leave immediately, without taking anything with them.
With these final pictures of the population of the capital city being ordered out into the countryside, Western television, which had made the Indochina conflict the most widely visible war in history, was itself ordered out. As a result, with these images, Cambodia has dropped out of sight, and no doubt for many, out of mind too. The only frontier Indochina has now with the non-communist world is with Thailand. The refugees have been heading to this border with their stories of what's been happening since the communists began to govern. This film was taken a month ago by Swiss television on the border between Thailand and the new Cambodia near Aranyaprathet. Down the paths and tracks to the frontier, they could see the little exodus of refugees. About 8,000 or 9,000 Cambodians are apparently living in camps just alongside the border of their own country in Thailand. 2,000 were shepherded in this one. The Swiss talked to a former forestry official who stayed for the first 3 months of the communist administration and then got out into Thailand on July the 21st.
When I left my village, these people were killing civil servants. It was their policy to kill all civil servants, because they think that they were all educated people, to clean up all educated people. And as I am myself a civil servant, I had to go.
The refugee camps are hardly the place to find sympathy for the actions of Cambodia's new communist government. Obviously, many of these people were its opponents. But a consistent thread runs through all their accounts of what happened after Phnom Penh fell. In recent weeks, a few refugees who escaped into Thailand have come to Paris. These Cambodians all spent 2 months or more inside Cambodia after the communists took charge. They all speak first of their shock at their sudden expulsion from towns and cities into the countryside, and they all seemed quite unprepared for the severity of the new discipline when it came.
When the Khmer Rouge first arrived in Pai Lin, more than 100 people tried to flee to Thailand because they did not like the Khmer Rouge. They were later caught by the Khmer Rouge and were all shot at the marketplace. There were over 100 of them. Soldiers who marched with us and who were then caught were killed. There were over 40 of them. They were very carelessly buried in a big shallow grave. Some of their arms and legs were still showing above the earth.
From Paris to the camps in Thailand, those are the stories the refugees